You may be seated. Kids, you're welcome to join your teachers and volunteers over there at that door. They'll take you back to your classrooms. It's great to be with you all this morning. This is the third Sunday in the season of Eastertide, wherein our church explores and celebrates the resurrection of Jesus of Nazareth and all the benefits and blessings therein. That's sort of a broad, sweeping understanding of the season of Eastertide. But more specifically for our church, we're exploring some of the stories that took place around the resurrection itself and a couple of things that took place in the weeks to follow. We have a few accounts of these things, and we're exploring those together as a community. And today, we get to explore the story that Aaron just read to you from the Gospel according to John. Now, John's a unique gospel. It's interesting. It's probably written 30 years or so after the three synoptic Gospels. It's got some stories in it that the other ones don't have. It creates some kind of texture and structure and meaning to some of the stories and events that the other one has. But if you put all of them together, what you develop is a composite understanding of these events and this person of Jesus. But before we get into sort of John's take in particular and what it means and what there is for us to contemplate, I want to focus in on one particular part of the story that Aaron just read to you so that we can start to ask ourselves some, I think, important questions about this text. There's something unique and interesting that happens in this story. It's not surprising. John finds a way, usually, to add something unique and interesting. In verse 17, Jesus says, "Do not hold on to me, for I have not yet ascended to the Father. Go instead to my brothers and tell them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God." Mary Magdalene went to the disciples with the news, "I have seen the Lord," and she told them what he had said, that he had said these things to her. I love this account from John. I think it's one of the most raw and visceral and human accounts of the resurrection, and this is true for many of his accounts of different events in Jesus' life and ministry. In particular, it begins with Mary being at the tomb weeping. She's distraught that her friend has died. And then it goes on to kind of tell this story where he simply says her name. He's disguised somehow, or maybe she's just in complete disbelief, but he simply says her name, and she recognizes exactly who it is. And she cries out, "Teacher," Rabboni, master, friend. She cries out a title, but in doing so basically says, "I've realized who you are, and I am blown away, and I am completely mesmerized by your presence." It's different from the take that we read last week from the Gospel of Matthew, where the angels are positioned, who's doing the talking, who says what. And it's an important thing to note here that John and the other gospel writers, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, these guys are all highlighting things that they found valuable in the story. None of those four people were there when Jesus resurrected. None of them, it's not like the four of them were like kind of sitting lined up and just sort of taking notes on the things that were taking place in the garden, okay? They weren't journalists. They weren't showing up to sort of like capture the events of a situation as unbiasedly as they possibly could. They were very biased in their recording. They were writing down things that were really important to them. And one thing that's consistently important to John throughout his entire gospel, especially when he's telling stories about Jesus and his friends, is highlighting how close he and Jesus were. He gets kind of made fun of a little bit for it because he's always talking about how he was like the beloved disciple and he was the one that Jesus loved the most and things like that, and people kind of give him a hard time for that. But I do the same thing, and so do you. If you're friends with a cool person, you tell people that you're friends with that person, okay? You want to make sure people can see your phone when that person is calling you because they're like, "Oh, wow, this is an important person." They have friends that are important. I introduce myself as Julie's husband all the time. Regularly, don't even use my name, unimportant. I'm married to a very cool person, and I would like for people to know that. There's nothing wrong with kind of bragging about a cool relationship that you have. And John does that. And it's because John's got this soft spot in his heart for the friendships that he kept. You can see his personality come out in all of his writings, and very different from other biblical authors in that he has this soft, visceral part of his heart that is deeply relationally connected. Even his depiction of Mary expresses this and explains this, where she's weeping and Jesus says her name, and he beautifully encapsulates the relationship they had in this experience, in this moment. But when we take all of the gospel writings and look at them in comparison, a lot of times we find discrepancies. And I want you to know right off the bat that I see no problem whatsoever with the discrepancies that we see in these stories. They don't discredit the value or importance of these stories to me at all. I understand for some of you that might be the case. That's totally fine. But just for what it's worth, I don't see it that way. If anything, I'm thinking of all of these things overlaid onto each other to create a composite understanding of who Jesus is and the events of Jesus' life. Much like a sketch artist would, if somebody was witness to a crime and a sketch artist would show up and they would, the perpetrator got away, and they had to draw this person's face or their demeanor or whatever it was based on this one person's memory, okay? So Vanity Fair did, there's a YouTube video where they had people watch a crime in a movie committed by a movie star, okay, in a movie, and then go to a sketch artist to just basically test how good these sketch artists are and describe this well-known movie star, and then the sketch artist would draw this person. And they got the best they could out of this person. Now, the sketch artist had no idea that they were drawing a movie star. They thought they were drawing an actual suspect for an actual crime. The results are pretty impressive. So here's Robert De Niro in Heat, okay? I mean, it's not a dead ringer, but it's not bad. It's pretty close. This is one person describing the crime that this person committed without describing them as Robert De Niro, okay? This is James Franco in Pineapple Express. Not bad, okay? This is Samuel L. Jackson in Pulp Fiction. Not great, not bad, right? This is one person just describing the situation, and then they got a pretty close composite of what this person likely looked like. Now you take several accounts, and you can get several details, because if you're watching Pulp Fiction, you might be very distracted by Samuel L. Jackson's sideburns. Or maybe you're thinking about whatever, his eyes or his nose or whatever it is. You're going to see different things than I would see. And the same goes for these gospel authors as they're writing about the stories of Jesus. I mean, John wrote his later, and I think he was like, you guys missed the wedding at Cana where Jesus turned water into wine. I'm putting that one in. That's chapter 2 of mine. And by the way, you missed that whole thing with this woman from Samaria at the well. That's all of chapter 4 for me. I can't believe you guys missed that one. I don't know how salty or snarky he was, but that's the way I would have written it. I'd have been like, you guys really blew it. And, wrote these things in later on after the fact. And in doing so, layer over layer, we get an understanding of who Jesus was, what Jesus valued, and what Jesus was like. And the thing that keeps standing out to me as I understand and consider the events of this season of Eastertide is the fact that ascension and resurrection were not side-by-side events. Now, in my upbringing, and sometimes I tell stories about my upbringing, and sometimes you relate to them, and sometimes you don't, and that's totally okay. But in my upbringing, I understood the two things as being almost simultaneous. Jesus resurrected from the dead, said hey to a few folks, and was ascending immediately. In my mind, those happened right away. But the history shows that these were actually about 40 days separated. And so I've become fascinated, a little obsessed over the last couple of years in just trying to understand what Jesus chose to do with those 40 days. Put yourself in that situation for a second. You've resurrected from the dead, okay? And you're right back where you were. It's not like you resurrected from the dead and you're in heaven or in a completely different place. You're exactly where you were when you were buried, okay? And you've got some time to do some things. Many of you are going for revenge, okay? You're going to find the haters, the people who, doubted you or whatever, the people who put you up there, the people who put you in the situation, the people who killed you. You're going to go after revenge. Some of you are just going to do the I told you so tour, right? You're going to find the people that, weren't so sure about you and whatever, and you're going to be like, see, I told you, I was legit. Think about the things that you would do at that time. Now, let's reconsider the words of Jesus to Mary. Maybe more particularly what John chooses to highlight in his composite sketch of who Jesus was and what Jesus cared about. Jesus, more than once in John's account, mentions the ascension. Not as an immediate event, but as something that's coming. And I find that so fascinating. It's not mentioned in these other texts. So keep in mind, John's personality is the one who Jesus loved, who is deeply relationally connected to Jesus and others. Keep that in mind. Keep in mind that John is writing about the things that he highlights and that he prefers. And then keep in mind, too, that we're trying to understand what Jesus did with these days. And I'm going to give you a minute to think about these things, okay? Now, I'm not going to ask you to talk to somebody else about it unless you want to. Some of you are chatty. You want to find a partner to talk with. That's completely fine. But I want you to just, at least by yourself, reflect on these things. Make a note in your phone, write something in a journal, or just think about this question for a minute. Why do you suppose that Jesus included his ascension in the news that he wanted Mary to share with his friends? Or another way to think about this, if you want to focus more on the author's personality, why do you suppose John included that piece in his recounting of the events of that day? Why do you suppose ascension is a key fixture piece of this? Take a minute to discuss or to reflect. Ascension, the ascension of Jesus specifically, remains for me one of the most curious mysteries of the story of Jesus. Ascension Sunday, the Sunday where we'll consider and contemplate the ascension of Jesus, is May 12th, which is also Mother's Day. I'm not going to remark a lot on the ascension right now because we'll talk about it that day. I love this topic, but what I really, really want to know is why did Jesus include that when it was still 40 days out? Why did Jesus include that in the message that he wanted Mary to share with his friends? Well, if we consider John's relationship with Jesus and the things that he wanted to highlight, and we consider this message of the ascension is coming, it's forthcoming, it's coming soon. I haven't ascended yet, but I'm going to soon. If we consider that, we can sort of speculate that what John wanted to convey from Jesus' message was essentially this: my time with you is running out, but it's not gone. My time with you is running out, but it's not gone. The disciples may have thought the same thing that I thought, that Jesus was going to resurrect and ascend simultaneously, that he would never be seen again, and that he was going to die, and we would just never see him again. But the news that Mary is supposed to bring to them is Jesus is alive and here, and he's going to stay that way for a little bit. But your time is limited, so now is your time to connect with him. You see, Jesus cared deeply about the relationships that he had with his disciples. He cared deeply about his friendships that he had with them. And one of the things that becomes painfully clear when you look at the interactions of Jesus with other people throughout not only his interaction that resurrection moment, but the moments thereafter, before the ascension, is that Jesus valued ordinary friendships. We think all the time about Jesus as this like incredible spiritual teacher, miracle worker, and he was all of those things. And he was a regular, ordinary person. And he had regular, ordinary friendships. And in this period of time between the resurrection and the ascension, Jesus elevates these ordinary friendships in a way that calls our attention and makes us think about our own relationships, make us think about our own friendships. Just yesterday, I was at Linda Wilson's memorial service. Linda is Devin's mother, and I realized for the past few weeks I've been calling her Devin's mom, and she is Devin's mom, and she's also Linda, so I'm just going to keep calling her Linda. Linda and I got to know each other quite a bit from 2013 through 2015. Was the job I had before I had this job. She and I worked together pretty closely. And I got to know Linda mostly by watching her interact with other people. And then I was reminded of all of those experiences yesterday at her memorial. Because time after time, people would come up and they would take the microphone and they would talk about the deep relational connection that they had with Linda, that she had cultivated with them over the course of years. And they would talk about the deep spiritual and discipleship impact that Linda had on them. But I know and many of them indicated this, I know that that came because of a strong relational connection that was built over millions of ordinary moments. Millions of ordinary moments of just overlapping her life with other people's lives. And it gave her an opportunity to disciple them, to help them grow spiritually, to be spiritually formed. But the foundation was made up of a million ordinary moments. When I think about spiritual formation and discipleship, I think a little bit about this, this quote from Living the Resurrection, which is a little book that Eugene Peterson wrote about this season of Eastertide, essentially. I highly recommend it. And he says this, he says, spiritual formation not only should not be, but also cannot be professionalized. It takes place essentially in the company of friends, of peers. When I think about Jesus and his ministry, when I think about Linda and her ministry, when I think about me and my ministry and you and yours, I think about sometimes the outcome or the final product, which is that we're walking alongside people and we're maybe having something spiritually insightful to share with them or some sort of deep encouragement, maybe a rebuke, I don't know what it is, but we're having these really deep spiritual friendships, these deep spiritual relationships, and in those relationships we're being spiritually formed and we're being discipled, this word that comes up in Christianity oftentimes, discipleship. But at the root of all of those meaningful, deep relationships, at the root of all of that discipleship and all of those spiritual formation moments is a million moments in the ordinary. That's what makes up the foundation of those friendships. And so I think some of you are probably thinking this and going like, yeah, that sounds great, but I don't really have close friends. Like I wish I had close friends, or the close friends that I did have, there's something that's come between us for whatever reason. Maybe it's literal physical distance, and I don't have those relationships or those friendships anymore. And I know that creating or building friendships in adulthood is really hard. I know it because I've done it, and I know that it's very, very, very difficult. But please call to mind the amount of time that it took for you to build those deep friendships that you did have at one time. It takes a tremendous amount of time, and it takes so much time in the ordinary. When you think about your best friends, your closest people, these are the people that you're texting really random, completely mundane, ordinary, and really unimportant things to, right? These are the sort of conversations you have on the phone where you're like driving down the road and you're basically just narrating your experience to them. And for some reason, they're okay with that. Like they're not hanging up the phone, you know? These are the kinds of people that you do ordinary things with because they've got to do ordinary things and you've got to do ordinary things and you might as well do them together. Like, I've got to go to the grocery store. I might as well do it with another person. I've got to go and get gas in my car. It's a weird place to meet somebody, but, you know, whatever. If that's what you've got to do to start stacking up these ordinary moments in order to build a foundation for spiritual formation. We have record of all these amazing, miraculous things that Jesus did. But for every single one of those miracles, there were a million ordinary things that came along with it. Like, I think about the feeding of the 5,000 sometimes, and I think there was a miracle that we're focused on there, and it was pretty amazing and impressive. But it all started with Jesus being like, these people are kind of hungry. Like, he was just talking about lunch. You know, have you ever had a conversation about lunch with somebody? That's a very ordinary conversation. It led to something really amazing and really spiritual and really incredible. But it just started with a conversation about lunch. That's a real basic, ordinary thing, and it builds relationships that lead to discipleship and spiritual formation. Americans love to specialize and professionalize as many things as we possibly can. You got a problem with your nose, go to a nose doctor. You got a problem with your eyebrow, go to the eyebrow doctor, whatever. Right? We love specialists, and they're important. Specialists matter, especially for our physical health. But when it comes to our spiritual formation, we're too dependent on spiritual professionals, okay? Pastors, church staff, that kind of thing. People we think of as sort of like spiritual gurus, when in reality, the person sitting right next to you, your peer, your friend, your spouse, your roommate, these are the people who oftentimes can lead to our spiritual growth and formation the most. That's my deep desire for you as I think about the life of Jesus, these resurrection stories, is that you would have the kind of relationship with Jesus and with others that's more like peers than some sort of master teacher that you sort of follow and do everything for. I would love for you to learn the ways of Jesus from the person sitting next to you. I want to be a part of it. I want to help, obviously, but I can't be your discipler. I can't do that. That's not my responsibility. I can't do that for this many people. I can't do that even for a fraction of this many people. We do that for each other. And we do that by building a foundation of 1 million ordinary moments for every one deeply significant or spiritual moment. Let's pray together. God, thank you for all these perspectives from friends of yours. People who knew you intimately and people who knew you really just from a distance or from stories. What that's done for us, what that's done for me is create this overlaid understanding of who you are. And God, as I think about the lives that all of us live, the job that we'll show up to tomorrow, the table we'll have to put food on tonight, all of the ordinary elements here and there. I see so much potential for the sacred to break through. And God, I pray that that would be the outcome for our church in this season especially, that the sacred would break through the ordinary and blossom and grow and explode into our lives. I pray that over our church and over our community, that there would be glimpses and even, again, just huge representations of love and celebration, even in the darkness, even in the pain, even in feeling lost. We love you, Lord, and we thank you for all the things you've given us. And we pray these things in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.